before we begin. If you enjoy quiet, unsettling stories like this, the kind you listen to with the lights off, consider subscribing. New stories are posted here regularly. Now, let me tell you what happened. I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about monsters, or ghosts, or anything supernatural. This is about people, and what they're capable of when they believe. No one is watching them. I spent that weekend alone, completely alone, in a cabin-style house on the edge of town. Not the kind of place you'd call remote, but not the kind of place. Help reaches quickly either. There were other houses nearby, technically, if you stood in just the right spot, and looked hard enough you could see a roof line through the trees. But people didn't really live there, not the way they do in normal neighborhoods. Days would pass, sometimes weeks, without seeing a single person. No joggers, no kids, no barking dogs, just trees. Endless trees. It was winter right after a heavy snowfall, the kind that doesn't sparkle, the kind that absorbs sound. Snow covered everything, roads, roofs, branches. The woods behind my house looked different, deeper, heavier, like the forest had leaned closer. While no one was looking, I didn't mind being alone. That's why I bought the place. The cabin was warm, comfortable, stone fireplace, wooden beams, wide open rooms, and windows. So many windows, floor-to-ceiling glass, walls made of it. During the day, they made the house feel open, connected to nature. At night, they made me feel exposed. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. I stayed up late in the living room, watching videos, half asleep. Midnight came and went, without me noticing. Eventually, I turned off the TV and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. It was a one-story house. My room sat at the very end of the hall, and just like the rest of the house, it had glass, an entire wall of it, and a sliding door. That opened directly toward the woods. I'd startled myself before, catching my reflection at night, thinking someone was standing there. That night, I told myself not to think about it. I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. That's when I heard it. A crack, sharp, deliberate, not wind, not an animal. The sound of weight, stepping on a thick branch. A few seconds passed. Then another crack. My body tensed. I sat up slowly, eyes locked on the window. With the lights off, the reflection disappeared, and the woods became visible. Tree after tree layered in darkness, snow faintly glowing, under moonlight. I stared. 30 seconds passed. Then something moved. Not a shape, not a body, just a shift between two trees, like a shadow leaning out of view, or into it. My chest tightened. Everything went still. I didn't move. I couldn't. Minutes crawled by. Eventually, I forced myself up and checked the sliding door. Locked. I got back into bed. Sleep didn't come. Every few seconds, my eyes snapped open. Drawn back to the window, nothing was there. Every time. Morning came, but the feeling didn't leave. Nothing happened. Nothing obvious. Yet every room felt occupied, not by a person, but by attention, like I was constantly being observed, from just beyond my vision. I'd turned suddenly, expecting to see a face. In the glass, I never did. But the feeling stayed. As night fell again, snow started coming down. I felt relieved. Snow meant noise. Snow meant footprints. Snow meant no one sane would be lurking outside. I was wrong. Around 10 that night, I sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, watching TV. The house glowed softly. Warm. Almost normal. I stood up to grab a drink, and that's when I noticed it. The light in the den was off. I stopped in the hallway. I never turned that light off. I kept it on, so the house wouldn't feel dark, so it wouldn't feel empty. I flipped the switch back on and told myself I was tired. Went back to the couch. Less than a minute later, I glanced over my shoulder. The light was off again. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer. The switch wasn't just dark. It was flipped down. Someone had touched it. Someone wanted me to notice. I backed away slowly. My phone was in my bedroom. My keys were by the front door. I needed both. I moved quietly down the hall. That's when I saw them, footprints. Fresh. Cutting through the snow. Outside my bedroom window. They led to a figure, standing just feet from the glass. A man, tall, still. Swallowed by darkness, but unmistakably. Facing me. Watching. I didn't scream, I ran. As I grabbed my keys, I heard footsteps. More than one, moving fast, circling the house. Coordinated. I burst out the door and sprinted to my car. The engine barely turned over before I saw him rounding the corner, charging straight toward me. I drove, didn't look back until he stopped, and just stood there watching me leave. Police arrived over 30 minutes later. What they found still haunts me. Windows shattered, furniture destroyed, doors ripped from hinges, walls torn apart, like something had been searching, hunting. I told them. I heard more than one person inside. They didn't argue. I never went back. Even now, I dream about that hallway, about the dark room, about stepping forward and knowing something is waiting, just out of sight, wanting me to come closer. I didn't move into that house because I wanted space. I moved into it because it was already mine. Selling it felt like admitting something had failed, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. So I stayed. The house was big. Too big for one person. Rooms I never used. Doors I kept closed. Corners I avoided without ever deciding to. I worked from home, which meant the days were quiet. Very quiet. At first I enjoyed it. The silence felt clean, predictable. But after a while, it started to feel deliberate, like the house was holding its breath. You don't notice how loud a place really is until nothing happens inside it. After about a year, I realized I was avoiding half the house. Not consciously. I just didn't go there. The doors stayed closed. The lights stayed off. I told myself there was no reason to go in. That was enough of an explanation. Most nights I stayed upstairs. Bedroom, office, bathroom. That was it. The rest of the house existed below me. Unused, unvisited. That's when I decided to get a dog. Not for protection. Not because I felt unsafe. Just because the house felt empty. In a way that didn't feel healthy anymore. The shelter called her Piper, a small beagle, still young. She was energetic when I met her, pulled at the leash, nose always moving. The drive home was uneventful. She slept most of the way. When we arrived, I opened the front door and stepped inside first. She followed, and then she stopped, not hesitating, not sniffing, just stopped. I waited for her to move again. She didn't. Her ears shifted slightly, her tail lowered. She looked past me into the house. I told myself it was normal. New smells, new place. I gently encouraged her forward. She walked a few steps inside, then turned around and climbed onto my lap. She pressed herself against me and stayed there, longer than expected. I remember thinking it was strange, but not frightening. That night passed quietly. The next morning, she followed me everywhere. Kitchen, bathroom, office. She lay under my desk while I worked. Occasionally, I checked on her. Each time she was asleep. Late in the morning, she stood up suddenly. She walked to the doorway and stopped halfway into the hall. She stood there, alert. After a few seconds, she continued down the hall, toward the stairs. I didn't follow. 10 minutes later, she started barking. Not playful barking. Not excited. Just barking. The sound echoed through the house, in a way that made it difficult to tell where she was. When I found her, she was standing in one of the downstairs rooms, an empty one, facing the wall. Not sniffing, not pacing, just standing there, still barking. When she noticed me, she moved closer and stayed close. I picked her up and closed the door to that room. I didn't open it again that day. That night, I woke up without knowing why. No sound, no movement, just awareness. Piper was standing at the bedroom door, not barking, not growling, just staring at the thin gap between the door and the frame. I said her name. She didn't respond. I lay back down. The next morning felt normal, almost convincing. By late afternoon, the house felt empty again. Too empty. I noticed Piper wasn't under my desk. I called her name. No response. The house was silent. As I walked downstairs, I noticed the door to the empty room was open. I was certain I'd closed it. Inside, Piper sat in the far corner, shaking. She was staring past me. That's when I turned around. At the far end of the hallway, near the stairs, someone stood partially in view. They didn't move. They didn't rush. They simply stepped back. Out of sight. I locked the door and stayed in the room. Footsteps passed outside. Slow. Measured. Not hurried. Like the house was familiar to them. When the police arrived later, they told me someone had been living there. Sleeping during the day, moving at night, using rooms I never entered. I moved out soon after. Piper has never acted like that again. But sometimes, when a house is too quiet, I still feel like something is listening. And I wonder how long they had been there before I noticed. Most days, nothing happened in that house. That was the problem. It sat on a quiet suburban street where sound carried too well. Cars passing 3 blocks away. Dogs barking behind closed fences. The low hum of things continuing without you. When you're alone long enough in a place like that, you start noticing what doesn't make noise. That week, the house was empty except for me. Not abandoned, just temporarily forgotten. I filled the time the same way I always did. Screens on, curtains half closed, lights off unless I needed them. Morning blurred into afternoon without effort. At some point, I went downstairs to make food. I don't remember being hungry, just restless. While I stood at the counter, my phone vibrated against the wood. I ignored it until the eggs were done. When I checked the screen, the message didn't register at first. It wasn't a question I expected to read. It was about my house, about someone standing outside it. I walked to the window slowly, already knowing I wouldn't see anything. And I didn't. The street looked exactly the way it always did. Still, ordinary. That was what made the message linger. I called my friend, expecting a laugh, a bad joke. Instead, he sounded uncertain, careful. He told me he'd seen a man earlier, not walking past, not knocking, standing still, facing the windows. By the time we talked, the man was gone. We didn't talk about it much after that. There was nothing to explain. So we did what people do when something doesn't fit anywhere. We ignored it. Hours passed while we stayed on a call, voices filling the silence the house refused to make. Late afternoon slipped into evening. That was when I noticed how dark it had become without me realizing. I went to the kitchen again, started cooking. Halfway through, something moved on the wall. Not fast, not clear, just enough to register. I turned. The room was empty. The window showed nothing but darkness. I stood there longer than I needed to. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just light changing. Later, upstairs, the TV played quietly while I lay on my bed. I hadn't turned on a single light. The glow from the screen stretched into the hallway through the crack under the door. Beyond it, nothing. The hallway felt longer than usual. I paused the show and stood up. I told myself I wanted a snack. That wasn't the real reason. Downstairs, I checked every window. I left every light on. The house looked safer that way. On my way back upstairs, I stopped halfway. There was a sound behind me. Not footsteps. An echo. Like someone trying to sound like footsteps. I moved again. The sound didn't repeat. That was worse. I stayed still, listening to my own breathing. Then I ran. Locked the door. Called the police. While I waited, I called my friend. He went to his window again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He told me he saw the man leaving, climbing out from the side of my house, disappearing into the trees. The police searched for him. They didn't find anything. They told me about another house nearby, another kid alone, another man outside. No clear pattern, no clear motive. That's what unsettled me most. Not knowing what he wanted, or how long he'd been close enough to hear me moving inside. Because whatever he was doing, he wasn't rushing, and he wasn't lost. He was waiting.